Your cedar fence ruins our neighborhood aesthetics.
HOA president. Gloria looked me dead in the eye and killed my $8,000 privacy fence plan on the spot. 24 hours later, she happily approved my neighbor's hideous white plastic wall because they're golf buddies every single Tuesday. I'm Derek. 20 years in landscaping. I needed that fence. Brittany's kids destroyed my garden. Her dog used my yard as a bathroom. Her floodlights turned my bedroom into a parking lot every night. They want aesthetics? Fine. So I planted something green and beautiful along our property line instead. Something that grows fast, looks gorgeous, and solves neighbor problems permanently. And it delivered justice in ways I never could have imagined. Worst HOA double standard you've ever witnessed? Drop your city plus your story below. I pin the most insane ones. I'm Derek Martinez, 52, and I've been building landscapes for 20 years. After my divorce, I bought this modest ranch house in Pinewood Springs, Colorado, 847 homes, mountains in the distance, and what I thought would be a fresh start. The house came with a quarter-acre lot and dreams of the perfect native garden. I spent months planning drought-resistant wildflowers, native grasses, herbs that actually belonged in Colorado soil. The smell of morning coffee mixed with pine needles became my daily ritual. Standing on my back deck, feeling the cool mountain air while planning which plants would thrive where. Then Brittany Hayes moved in next door. Brittany's a real estate agent, 43, blonde, drives a white BMW that always looks freshly washed, and has zero concept of property boundaries. Within a week, her 2 kids were using my vegetable garden as their personal playground. I'd step outside to the wet crunch of destroyed tomato plants under my boots, finding soccer balls wedged between my carefully staked pepper plants. The sharp smell of crushed basil would hit me as I surveyed the daily damage. Her German Shepherd? Different problem entirely. Every morning brought the unmistakable stench of fresh dog shit scattered through my herb beds like some kind of biological warfare. Every single morning. I'd have to navigate the minefield with a plastic bag and a grimace. But the real torture started at night. Brittany installed these industrial LED security lights, the kind they use for parking lots, that blasted directly into my bedroom window. The harsh white glare cut through my blackout curtains like a laser, turning 2 a.m. into high noon. I'd lie there listening to the electric hum of those damned lights, getting maybe 3 hours of sleep. I tried reasoning with her. Hey, could you maybe angle those lights toward your own property? They're for safety, she said, not even looking up from her phone. Her kids were throwing mud at my fence while she talked. So I did what any professional would do. Submitted plans for a 6-foot cedar privacy fence. Professional design, $8,000 investment, beautiful traditional post and rail that would enhance both properties. I know fences. I've installed hundreds. This design was flawless. The HOA has this president, Gloria Whitman, 59 years old, retired bank manager who looks like she irons her golf shirts. Lives in the biggest house on the street, a 2-story colonial with a circular driveway that screams, "I have opinions about your landscaping." Gloria treats the HOA like her personal kingdom, complete with a crown made of other people's violation notices. Here's where it gets interesting. Gloria and Brittany became instant best friends. Golf every Tuesday at the country club. Same Pilates class Thursday mornings. Wine nights on her deck where they probably plan new ways to terrorize the neighborhood. I submitted my fence application on a Monday morning. Professional drawings, engineered specifications, soil analysis, setback measurements, everything perfect. Wednesday morning, rejection letter in my mailbox. Aesthetic concerns, potential property value impact. No explanation, no suggestions for improvement. Just no. Friday afternoon, Brittany gets instant approval for 3 massive white plastic privacy screens, 8 feet tall, bright white plastic that looks like something from a construction site. They violate at least 4 aesthetic guidelines I can think of, but apparently those meet community standards. I stood in my backyard that Friday evening, staring at her plastic prison wall blocking my mountain view, listening to her dog bark at 10 p.m. while her kids screamed in their above-ground pool. The smell of chlorine mixed with dog waste hung heavy in the humid air. That's when I realized this wasn't about fences or aesthetics or property values. This was about who you drink wine with on Tuesday nights. And I was about to teach both women why you should never discriminate against someone who spent 2 decades learning which plants grow fast, thick, and solve problems permanently in Colorado soil. Saturday morning, I did what any professional does when facing discrimination. I researched the hell out of it. Spent the entire weekend buried in HOA covenants, county regulations, and neighborhood precedent files. The taste of stale coffee grew bitter in my mouth as I flipped through page after page of bureaucratic nonsense, getting paper cuts from thick legal documents that felt like they were designed to discourage normal people from fighting back. But I'm not normal people. I'm a guy who spent 20 years reading soil composition reports and municipal codes. This was just another type of dirt to dig through. First discovery: fence height restrictions only apply to front yards. Backyard fences? No height limits anywhere in our covenants. Gloria had rejected my fence based on rules that didn't even exist. I grabbed my camera and spent Saturday afternoon documenting every cedar fence in Pinewood Springs. Found 15 others, all approved in the past 3 years. Same height, same materials, same traditional design. Hell, some were uglier than mine. Crooked posts, warped boards, amateur installation that made my professional plans look like artwork. Sunday morning brought more evidence. Brittany's plastic screens violated 3 separate guidelines I could find: setback requirements, color restrictions, and material standards. Her screens sat 2 feet closer to the property line than allowed, violated the earth tone colors only requirement, and plastic wasn't even on the approved materials list. I remembered something from my contractor training years ago. HOAs have to enforce rules consistently or they face discrimination lawsuits. You can't approve ugly plastic for your golf buddy while rejecting beautiful cedar for everyone else. That's literally the definition of unfair treatment. Monday morning, I filed a formal appeal. 12 pages of evidence, professional photographs, precedent documentation, and a polite but firm request for equal treatment. I also submitted violation reports on Brittany's screens, demanding either immediate removal or approval of my cedar fence. The response came Tuesday evening, and it reeked of corruption worse than Brittany's dog's morning bathroom routine. My appeal? Rejected without explanation, not even a phone call. But Wednesday morning brought something special, a violation notice taped to my front door like some kind of scarlet letter. Apparently, my unkempt native landscaping now violated community standards. The wildflower meadow I'd spent 2 years cultivating, the drought-resistant native plants that actually belonged in Colorado soil, now they were unsightly weeds. 30 days to rip out my beautiful native ecosystem and replace it with water-hungry turf grass, or face $500 daily fines. I stood there holding that notice, feeling the morning sun warm my face while bees buzzed through my unsightly wildflowers, and something clicked. This wasn't about aesthetics or property values. This was Gloria flexing her power, showing me what happens when you challenge the queen bee. But here's the thing about bees. They know which flowers to avoid and which ones to cultivate. That evening, I sat in my wildflower meadow with the sweet scent of evening primrose filling the air, remembering something my grandfather taught me about natural barriers. He'd grown up in rural Colorado, back when neighbors solved problems without HOA presidents and violation notices. Native Americans knew which plants grew thick and discouraged unwanted visitors, he used to say. Nature's been building fences longer than humans have been building houses. Colorado has plenty of native species perfect for natural fencing. Plants that grow fast, provide privacy, and solve neighbor problems permanently. I'd installed plenty of decorative barriers using indigenous species, wild grape, Virginia creeper, native honeysuckle. But sitting there in my threatened meadow, I remembered one particular 3-leafed beauty that definitely qualified as native ground cover restoration. I spent that night researching the Colorado Native Plant Protection Act, discovering that environmental restoration projects override HOA landscape restrictions. Native species restoration enjoys state environmental protection. You can't fine someone for restoring indigenous plants to their natural habitat. And poison ivy? Definitely native to Colorado, indigenous, protected, and absolutely perfect for creating dense, effective privacy barriers. The next morning, I filed an environmental restoration permit with the County Environmental Office. Native ground cover restoration along property boundaries for wildlife habitat enhancement. Legitimate paperwork, legitimate environmental purpose, and completely legal under state law. While Gloria and Brittany were playing their Tuesday golf game, probably laughing about their latest power move, I was researching which local nurseries carried native plant starter collections. The smell of fresh possibility mixed with my morning coffee as I sketched out my new landscaping plan. Sometimes the best solutions grow naturally, You just have to plant the right seeds in the right soil at the right time. And I knew exactly which seeds would thrive along our property line, creating the most beautiful, effective, and perfectly legal privacy barrier Gloria and Brittany had ever seen. Thursday morning, I drove to the county environmental office with my restoration permit application. The clerk, a young woman with dirt under her fingernails who clearly understood plants, smiled when she read my proposal. Native ground cover restoration? We love seeing homeowners take environmental responsibility seriously, she said, stamping my application. This permit supersedes any HOA restrictions under the Colorado Environmental Protection Act. Perfect. I now had legal armor that even Gloria couldn't penetrate. Friday afternoon, I visited Mountain View Native Nursery on the outskirts of town. The owner, an old-timer named Pete who smelled like mulch and cigarettes, walked me through their indigenous species starter collection. When I mentioned poison ivy for my restoration project, he didn't even blink. Grows fast, provides excellent ground cover, and most folks leave it alone once it's established, Pete said with a knowing grin. Natural privacy barrier that maintains itself. Of course, you'll want to be real careful during planting season. I bought a diverse collection of native plants, including several poison ivy specimens that would blend perfectly with Virginia creeper and wild grape. From the street, it would look like professional habitat restoration. Up close? Well, that would depend on how closely someone wanted to inspect my environmental project. Saturday morning, I began planting along the entire 200-foot property line. The soil felt perfect under my gloved hands, rich, well-drained, with morning sun and afternoon shade. The earthy smell of fresh mulch mixed with the sweet scent of possibility. But Brittany had been watching from her kitchen window like some kind of suburban surveillance agent. By noon, she was outside documenting my every move with her phone. The metallic click of her camera became the soundtrack to my weekend, punctuated by her loud phone conversations. Yes, he's definitely doing something suspicious over there. What are you planting? She demanded, marching over to the property line. Environmental restoration, I replied, carefully positioning a poison ivy starter between some innocent Virginia creeper. Native species habitat enhancement. She squinted at my plants like she was trying to identify evidence at a crime scene. Too bad Brittany's plant knowledge maxed out at knowing grass is green. Monday brought her retaliation campaign. She filed noise complaints about my excessive early morning watering activities. Apparently, caring for my restoration project at 6 a.m. constituted disturbing the peace. She also started parking her BMW partially across my driveway during her kids' sports pickups, forcing me to squeeze past her car like some kind of automotive obstacle course. The deliberate screech of her brakes and the theatrical slam of her car doors at dawn became her new favorite passive-aggressive symphony. Tuesday evening, I watched her kids accidentally kick soccer balls into my restoration area during their backyard play. Each ball somehow found the most delicate seedlings with precision that would impress a professional soccer player. But here's what Brittany didn't understand about native plants. They're survivors. 20 million years of Colorado evolution doesn't get defeated by a few soccer balls. Then came the mini twist that almost derailed everything. Wednesday afternoon, Gloria attempted her power play. She called the county environmental office claiming my restoration violated community safety standards and demanded immediate permit revocation. Apparently, she'd spent an hour screaming at supervisors about dangerous plant cultivation near children. My phone rang at 4 p.m. Sandra, the environmental inspector, sounded concerned. Mrs. Whitman filed a formal complaint about your project. She's claiming you're cultivating invasive species that threaten neighborhood children. I have to investigate. My stomach dropped. If Gloria convinced them to revoke my permit, my whole plan collapsed. But I'd done my homework. Sandra, every plant I'm using appears on the state's indigenous species preservation list. I have documentation for everything. I believe you, she said, but I still have to do a site inspection. Friday morning. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. The smell of rain on my new plantings drifted through my bedroom window while I worried about Gloria's interference. If she somehow killed my environmental protection, I'd be back to square one with no legal recourse. Friday morning, Sandra arrived with her clipboard and a serious expression. She examined my plantings with scientific precision, checking spacing and species documentation. I held my breath while she identified each plant. "This is impressive work," she finally announced. "Your restoration project exceeds our standards for native habitat enhancement. These plants will provide excellent wildlife corridor benefits." She handed me an official compliance certificate and delivered the knockout punch. Any interference with a certified environmental restoration project constitutes criminal environmental vandalism under state law. Fines start at $50,000 per incident. That afternoon, I posted my environmental compliance certificate on the community bulletin board, right next to Gloria's newsletter about maintaining neighborhood standards. The irony tasted sweeter than my morning coffee. My poison ivy starters were already showing new growth, small three-leaf clusters emerging among the Virginia creeper, invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Nature was taking its course along our property line, one leaf at a time. Sometimes the best revenge grows slowly, quietly, and completely legally. 2 weeks into my restoration project, I discovered I wasn't fighting this war alone. Elena Rodriguez knocked on my door Tuesday evening, clutching a manila folder that looked thick enough to choke a horse. She's the HOA board secretary, 38, works in accounting, always seemed invisible during Gloria's theatrical board meetings. Turns out invisible people see everything. I've been documenting Gloria's illegal activities for 8 months, she whispered, glancing around like we were plotting a bank heist. The folder hit my kitchen counter with the weight of a phone book. She's violating open meeting laws, hiding financial records, and embezzling community funds. The documents Elena spread across my table told a story of systematic corruption that would make a politician blush. Gloria had been collecting emergency assessment fees for infrastructure repairs that existed only in her imagination. $47,000 in unauthorized charges over 18 months, with most money flowing directly to Brittany's real estate company for consulting services. Property evaluations that were never conducted, marketing consultations for a community that isn't for sale, Elena explained, her finger tracing bank transfers. She's been paying Brittany $3,000 monthly for absolutely nothing. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the intoxicating scent of evidence as we worked past midnight, building a case that would make any prosecutor salivate. Wednesday brought another ally when Frank Kowalski joined our suburban resistance movement. Frank's a 67-year-old retired attorney who's been fighting Gloria for 3 years over accessibility requirements for his disabled wife. Turns out, Gloria's discrimination wasn't limited to landscaping preferences. She denied our ramp permit claiming architectural concerns, Frank said, adjusting his reading glasses over Elena's financial evidence. Federal disability law trumps HOA aesthetics, but she doesn't care about actual laws. While we built our legal case, my poison ivy was conducting its own underground revolution. 3 weeks of perfect Colorado spring weather, warm days, cool nights, gentle morning dew, created ideal conditions for aggressive growth. The underground rhizome network was already extending beyond my original plantings, establishing invisible colonies that would emerge throughout the growing season. But Brittany wasn't surrendering her harassment campaign without escalating to outright crime. Thursday night around 11 p.m., I heard the telltale sound of liquid being sprayed near my property line. The harsh chemical smell hit my nostrils even from inside the house. My security cameras captured everything in perfect night vision clarity. Brittany, in dark clothes, systematically coating my restoration area with industrial herbicide. Friday morning, the acrid stench of chemical warfare hung heavy in the air. Brown edges appeared on my Virginia creeper and wild grape, making the damage obvious to anyone passing by. But here's where Brittany's ignorance of plant biology became my greatest advantage. Poison ivy is notoriously resistant to most commercial herbicides. While other plants showed stress, my poison ivy looked more vibrant than ever. The chemicals had actually eliminated competing vegetation, giving poison ivy more space and resources to expand. It was like Brittany had personally fertilized my revenge garden. I filed a police report with crystal clear video evidence of criminal destruction of protected habitat. The responding officer, a young guy who obviously understood environmental law, looked genuinely pissed when he reviewed the footage. "This is felony environmental vandalism," he told Brittany during his visit to her house. His voice carried across both yards, plus criminal trespassing and illegal chemical application near protected water sources. "You're looking at federal charges." The insurance claim for restoration damage gave me another paper trail documenting Brittany's escalating criminal behavior. But the real gift came during my Sunday morning coffee ritual. Examining my restoration area in the golden morning light, I noticed something beautiful. Brittany's sabotage had backfired spectacularly. The herbicide damage created perfect growing conditions for poison ivy expansion, while the chemical stress made surviving plants produce higher concentrations of urushiol oil as a defense mechanism. My enemies were literally making my revenge more potent without realizing it. By Monday, word of my environmental project and the harassment campaign had spread throughout the neighborhood. Mrs. Tessa brought her grandchildren to learn about native plants, praising my gorgeous natural privacy solution. The irony of people admiring my poison ivy barrier while having no idea what they were looking at never got old. The local environmental group featured my restoration in their newsletter as exemplary suburban conservation, scheduling a community demonstration for the following weekend. Tuesday evening, I stood among my thriving plants as sunset light filtered through the growing canopy. The sweet, deceptive fragrance of poison ivy flowers was beginning to emerge, a scent most people find pleasant until they discover its source. Hidden perfectly among legitimate native species, my poison ivy was establishing itself as the permanent, untouchable foundation of the most effective neighbor deterrent system money couldn't buy. Everything completely legal, environmentally beneficial, and naturally beautiful. Some revenge requires patience, but the wait is always worth it when you're working with Mother Nature's timeline. Frank's legal research turned up something that changed everything. Wednesday afternoon, he called with excitement crackling in his voice. "Derek, you need to see this. I found the original subdivision developer agreement buried in the county archives." We met at his kitchen table where Frank spread out photocopied documents that smelled like old paper and forgotten promises. Hidden in Section 12C of the Environmental Compliance Agreement was a clause that made my coffee taste sweeter than birthday cake. Any property owner may establish native habitat restoration to fulfill original environmental commitments, Frank read aloud, his finger tracing the faded text. Such projects cannot be restricted by homeowner associations without violating federal environmental protection agreements. I nearly choked on my coffee. Are you saying Gloria has no legal authority over my restoration? I'm saying she never had authority and she's been violating federal environmental law every time she's interfered with your project. Elena's discovery explained why this clause had been buried deeper than a murder victim. While organizing Gloria's deliberately chaotic filing system, a mess that would make a hoarder weep, she found internal memos discussing how to minimize homeowner environmental rights awareness. They'd been hiding this information from residents for years. Thursday brought Elena's financial bombshell that made Gloria's corruption crystal clear. The real embezzlement wasn't just Brittany's fake consulting fees, it was systematic theft disguised as community improvements. Phantom landscaping assessments, fake legal fees, emergency repair charges for work that never happened, Elena explained, spreading bank statements across my kitchen counter. She's stolen $73,000 over 18 months. But the smoking gun was email correspondence between Gloria and Brittany discussing their problem neighbor removal strategy. They'd been systematically harassing residents who questioned Gloria's authority, using manufactured violations to drive out anyone who threatened her control. I wasn't their first target, just their latest. Friday morning brought news that elevated my humble revenge garden into something magnificent. The county environmental office called with an offer I couldn't have imagined. "We'd like to designate your property as an official native habitat demonstration site," Sandra announced. "Your restoration work represents exactly the kind of suburban conservation we want to promote statewide." The designation came with ironclad protection. Any interference with my restoration would constitute federal environmental crime. More importantly, certified demonstration sites receive ongoing state support, ensuring my poison ivy paradise would be officially protected forever. But wait, there's more, as they say on late-night TV. Successful demonstration sites qualify for annual tax credits up to $4,000, Sandra added. Plus, we'll bring university environmental science classes to study your techniques. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. While Gloria plotted my destruction, I'd accidentally created an environmental showcase that would be studied by college students and protected by federal law. My underground poison ivy network was now extending beyond both our properties, establishing colonies in soil where removal would require destroying the entire certified habitat, a federal crime punishable by massive fines. Friday evening, I stood among my thriving plants as sunset painted everything golden. The deceptively sweet fragrance of poison ivy flowers mixed with wild honeysuckle, creating an aroma that invited closer inspection. Birds were already nesting in the dense growth, and beneficial insects buzzed through leaves that would soon teach very painful lessons to anyone foolish enough to handle them. Frank called with one final revelation that made everything perfect. "Gloria made a critical error," he explained. She used HOA funds to hire attorneys specifically to find ways around environmental protection law. She's not just stealing community money, she's using it to conspire against federal environmental regulations. The beautiful irony was inescapable. While Gloria and Brittany schemed to destroy my project, they'd handed me complete legal immunity and turned my poison ivy garden into a federally protected environmental landmark. By next spring, my revenge would be spreading underground throughout both our properties, emerging in dozens of new locations where it would be legally untouchable. Some plants grow slowly, but they grow permanently. And sometimes the best revenge is simply letting nature take its course under the full protection of federal law. With federal protection secured and summer approaching, it was time to orchestrate the perfect natural justice system. I mapped out my strategy like a general planning the ultimate siege, except my weapons were 3-leaf plants and my battlefield was a neighborhood barbecue. Phase 1. Complete poison ivy maturation before peak outdoor season. 6 weeks for the underground network to establish permanent colonies. By July, my invisible army would be locked and loaded. Phase 2. Document Gloria's continued harassment for the legal case. Frank and Elena needed her to keep digging her own grave with witnessed criminal behavior. Phase 3. Time maximum exposure during our annual neighborhood barbecue. 200+ people, local officials, and environmental students studying my demonstration site. Phase 4. Maintain complete innocence while nature delivers justice with the efficiency of a Swiss watch. The poison ivy cultivation required artistic precision. I spent May perfecting what I privately called the honey trap, strategic trimming that created beautiful natural archways along the property line. To everyone else, it looked like professional landscape design, encouraging closer inspection of gorgeous native plants. Morning dew made everything sparkle like diamonds, creating Instagram-worthy photo opportunities that drew people in for that perfect nature shot. What visitors wouldn't realize until days later was that humid morning conditions trigger maximum urushiol oil production, when even brief contact guarantees severe reactions. I installed subtle solar lighting that highlighted the densest poison ivy areas, creating romantic evening ambiance perfect for quiet garden strolls. The soft glow made 3-leaf clusters look like delicate wildflowers in twilight, absolutely irresistible for nature lovers. Here's something that would make any gardener's skin crawl. Mature poison ivy oil remains active on surfaces for up to 5 years. Contaminated garden tools, clothing, even camera phones become biological weapons that spread the joy long after initial contact. Touch a poisoned leaf, then grab your car keys, and suddenly your steering wheel becomes a daily dose of misery. Frank coordinated our legal timing with surgical precision. We needed Gloria's corruption exposed during the barbecue for maximum community impact, but also wanted criminal charges filed at the moment of peak public attention. Elena had been secretly recording board meetings where Gloria discussed eliminating undesirable residents and protecting our investment from certain elements. Her recordings would give prosecutors everything they needed to prove systematic discrimination and conspiracy. My security cameras now covered every inch of the property line, with motion-activated recording that would document any sabotage attempts against the federally protected habitat. Environmental crime investigators had coached me on evidence preservation. Apparently, federal judges take habitat vandalism very seriously. The community support was growing beyond anything I'd imagined. Mrs. Tessa's garden club planned a group visit during the barbecue. The environmental group organized a native species appreciation tour, featuring my restoration as the crown jewel. The mayor's office wanted to showcase my project as a model for sustainable development. Everyone was excited to get intimately acquainted with my poison ivy without having the slightest clue what they were touching. I created the Educational Engagement Zone, comfortable seating surrounded by informational signs about native plant benefits, positioned strategically in the heart of poison ivy paradise. Decorative benches encouraged lingering, while bird baths and butterfly gardens drew visitors into direct contact with surrounding vegetation. The weather forecast made everything perfect. 94 degrees with 85% humidity. Conditions that would make my poison ivy produce oil concentrations like a biological weapons factory, while ensuring optimal skin absorption for anyone foolish enough to handle the plants. Tuesday evening, I noticed Brittany scratching her arms during her nightly garden surveillance routine. She'd been developing mysterious rashes for weeks, attributing them to stress and seasonal allergies. The poor woman had no idea she was slowly poisoning herself just by standing downwind of my restoration project during evening watering sessions. The sweet irony was delicious. My enemy was defeating herself through her own obsessive harassment. Thursday brought my final preparation, creating the demonstration stations, where environmental students would showcase native plant identification techniques. I positioned these learning areas in spots where eager students and curious neighbors would inevitably brush against poison ivy while examining educational specimens. Saturday evening, I stood among my thriving ecosystem watching sunset light filter through leaves that had become nature's own justice delivery system. The deceptively pleasant fragrance of poison ivy flowers hung heavy in the humid air, a perfume that invited closer inspection while hiding botanical revenge beneath its sweet surface. Everything was ready: legal immunity, environmental protection, community enthusiasm, and a poison ivy network that had colonized both properties like Mother Nature's own underground resistance movement. The barbecue was 3 days away. Soon, everyone who'd made my life miserable would learn exactly why you should never underestimate someone who truly understands which plants bite back. Some revenge requires patience, but the payoff is always worth the wait when you're working with 20 million years of evolutionary perfection. With the barbecue only days away, Gloria's desperation reached full-blown panic mode. Monday morning, I found her standing in my driveway at 6 a.m., clutching what looked like official paperwork and wearing the expression of someone whose entire world was about to collapse. The morning dew made her perfectly styled hair look like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket. "This is a cease and desist order from the Environmental Protection Agency," she announced, waving the document like it was radioactive. "Your dangerous plant cultivation ends immediately." I rubbed sleep from my eyes, genuinely curious about what fresh delusion she'd conjured. The sweet scent of poison ivy flowers mixed with the acrid smell of Gloria's desperation made for an interesting morning perfume. One glance at her federal document revealed the beautiful truth. It was obviously fake. Wrong letterhead, misspelled agency names, and a signature that looked like someone had sneezed while holding a crayon. "Gloria," I said calmly, "you realize that creating fraudulent federal documents is a felony, carrying 5 years in prison?" Her face went whiter than fresh toilet paper. I pulled out my phone and called Sandra at the county environmental office, putting it on speaker for the whole neighborhood to hear. "I'm looking at what appears to be a fake EPA order regarding my demonstration site. Mr. Martinez, no federal agencies have issued violations for your property." Sandra's voice carried clearly across both yards. "In fact, we received confirmation yesterday that your site will be featured in next month's state environmental newsletter." Gloria fled back to her house faster than a cat with its tail on fire. But Brittany wasn't about to let her criminal accomplice face federal fraud charges alone. Tuesday evening brought the mini twist that almost made me choke on my coffee. Brittany had recruited not just neighborhood kids, but convinced 3 other families that my restoration project was a toxic threat to community safety. She organized what she called an emergency removal party for Wednesday evening. "We're going to clean up Derek's dangerous weeds before they spread to other yards," she told Mrs. Patterson from 2 streets over. "Some of these plants could seriously hurt children." I watched through my kitchen window as Brittany handed out garden tools and trash bags to a group of well-meaning neighbors who had no idea they were about to commit federal environmental crimes while poisoning themselves with concentrated urushiol oil. But here's where being a professional landscaper with 20 years of plant knowledge becomes pure gold. I knew exactly how this would end, and it was going to be spectacular. Instead of calling the authorities immediately, I decided to let nature handle this particular problem. Sometimes the best education comes from personal experience. Wednesday evening, 8 neighbors showed up with Brittany to remove the dangerous invasive species from my property line. I watched from my deck with a beer and a bag of popcorn as they enthusiastically grabbed armfuls of poison ivy with their bare hands, stuffing it into garbage bags while Brittany cheered them on. "Make sure you get all the roots," she shouted, personally demonstrating proper poison ivy handling technique by wrestling with a particularly robust specimen. The next morning I called the Environmental Crimes Hotline and reported the habitat destruction with complete video documentation. But honestly, federal charges were going to be the least of their problems over the next 48 hours. Thursday brought the beautiful sight of Brittany and her volunteer army developing the first signs of poison ivy reactions. Mysterious itching and redness they attributed to cleaning chemical sensitivity and dust allergies. By Friday morning, the real show was starting. Brittany's hands looked like she'd dipped them in acid. Her face was swelling like a balloon, and her volunteer helpers were frantically calling each other, trying to figure out what had attacked them during their community service project. But the cosmic justice wasn't finished yet. Friday afternoon, the environmental science students arrived to set up their demonstration stations for Saturday's barbecue. They were positioning educational displays in the exact areas where Brittany's crew had concentrated their cleanup efforts. Spots now contaminated with poison ivy oil residue that would remain active for months. The weather forecast for Saturday was perfect. 96 degrees with 85% humidity, ideal conditions for spreading urushiol oil through sweat and physical contact. Friday evening, I stood among what remained of my poison ivy paradise. Still plenty left for maximum impact, but now with the added bonus of oil contamination throughout the entire area from Brittany's enthusiastic destruction. My enemies had literally turned my entire demonstration site into a biological weapons testing facility while documenting their own federal crimes on video. Some people dig their own graves, but the special ones poison themselves while doing it, then invite the whole neighborhood to join them at the bottom. Saturday morning brought pure chaos disguised as community preparation. The barbecue setup began at 8 a.m., with volunteers spreading throughout the community park adjacent to my property. The sweet smell of charcoal lighter fluid mixed with the deceptive fragrance of poison ivy flowers created an aromatic preview of the justice about to unfold. Brittany arrived looking like she'd been attacked by an angry beehive. Her face was swollen, her hands wrapped in bandages, and she was scratching constantly through long sleeves, despite the 85-degree morning temperature. But desperation makes people do stupid things. She was determined to expose Derek's dangerous plants during the barbecue, despite being a walking advertisement for poison ivy exposure. Her volunteer cleanup crew looked equally miserable, sporting various stages of poison ivy reactions while trying to maintain normal social interactions. Mrs. Patterson kept making excuses to step away and scratch her arms raw, while Mr. Tess's face looked like he'd been stung by 1,000 bees. But they'd all convinced themselves they were suffering from chemical sensitivity or seasonal allergies, anything except admitting they'd been poisoned by the plants they'd voluntarily destroyed. Gloria arrived with her own agenda and what appeared to be a complete mental breakdown. Despite facing federal fraud charges, she'd decided this barbecue would be her last stand to restore proper community standards. "I'm going to personally demonstrate why Derek's illegal plants threaten our neighborhood," she announced to anyone within earshot, gesturing dramatically toward my demonstration site. Community safety comes before environmental extremism. The beautiful irony made my morning coffee taste like liquid victory. My two greatest enemies were about to voluntarily expose themselves to concentrated poison ivy, while an audience of 200-plus neighbors, environmental students, and news cameras documented every moment. Mid-morning brought the mini twist that elevated everything to pure comedy gold. Elena approached me with barely contained laughter. "Derek, you have to see this. Gloria's hired a landscaping crew to remove your plants during the barbecue for emergency community safety." I followed her gaze to see a truck marked Premium Landscaping Solutions parked on the street. 3 workers in protective gear were unloading equipment, clearly preparing for some kind of dramatic plant removal demonstration. But here's what Gloria didn't realize. I knew every landscaping crew in the county. These weren't professionals. The protective gear was Halloween costumes, the equipment was borrowed from Home Depot, and the truck belonged to Brittany's brother-in-law, who runs a house painting business. They were about to attempt removing federally protected habitat using fake credentials while being filmed by environmental science students. This was going to be better than any reality TV show ever produced. Noon brought community members streaming into the park, many heading directly toward my demonstration site for the scheduled Native Species Appreciation Tour. Mrs. Tessa's Garden Club had brought clipboards for plant identification activities, while environmental students set up hands-on learning stations encouraging direct contact with specimens. Everyone was eager to get intimately acquainted with my poison ivy without having any clue what they were touching. The weather was absolutely perfect, 94 degrees with humidity thick enough to swim through. Conditions that made poison ivy oil practically jump off the plants and onto anything that came within brushing distance. 2 p.m. brought the convergence of pure poetic justice. Gloria's fake landscaping crew began their emergency removal demonstration. just as the Environmental Appreciation Tour reached peak attendance. Brittany, despite looking like she'd been mauled by a rabid badger, joined the fake crew to personally direct the destruction of dangerous invasive species. Tessé. News cameras captured everything as Gloria explained to reporters how she was protecting community children from toxic plant exposure while systematically destroying federally protected habitat on live television. The environmental science students watched in horror as Gloria's crew grabbed armfuls of poison ivy with inadequate protection, but they were too polite to interrupt what appeared to be an official community safety demonstration. 3 p.m. brought the moment I'd been waiting for. Frank arrived with federal environmental investigators who'd been monitoring Gloria's illegal activities. But instead of immediately stopping the habitat destruction, they decided to document the full extent of the crimes being committed. Sometimes the best evidence comes from letting criminals demonstrate their complete disregard for federal law, Frank whispered, as we watched Gloria personally wrestling with a particularly robust poison ivy specimen while news cameras rolled. By 4 p.m., my demonstration site looked like a battlefield, but the real war was just beginning. Every person involved in the emergency removal was now contaminated with concentrated poison ivy oil, and the humid evening conditions would ensure maximum absorption over the next several hours. The barbecue was officially starting, and justice was about to be served with a side of biological warfare. Some revenge takes months to plan, but when it finally arrives, it's more satisfying than Christmas morning and more permanent than a tattoo. The barbecue hit full swing at 5 p.m. with over 200 neighbors gathered in the community park. The smell of grilling burgers mixing with the deceptive sweetness of poison ivy flowers carried on the evening breeze. News cameras were positioned throughout the crowd, ostensibly covering my environmental success story, but they'd captured something much more dramatic: Gloria's systematic destruction of federally protected habitat while claiming to protect community safety. I moved through the crowd like a gracious host, explaining native plant benefits to genuinely interested neighbors, while internally counting down to the moment when federal justice would arrive. Elena found me near the beverage station. "The environmental investigators are ready," she whispered. "Frank's coordinating with the sheriff's department for maximum impact." 6 p.m. brought the convergence of every element I'd orchestrated over 3 months of careful planning. Gloria stood before the assembled crowd, her hands visibly contaminated with poison ivy oil, despite her claims of professional plant removal expertise. She'd positioned herself near the remains of my demonstration site, preparing to deliver what she clearly believed would be her vindication speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gloria announced, her voice carrying across the park, "I've taken decisive action to protect our community from dangerous plant contamination that threatened our children's safety." The crowd murmured approval while environmental science students exchanged concerned glances. News cameras focused on Gloria as she gestured toward my property with poison ivy-contaminated hands. "Derek Martinez has been cultivating toxic species under the false pretense of environmental restoration," she continued, unknowingly sealing her legal fate with every word. "But community safety must always come before individual environmental extremism." That's when Frank stepped forward with 2 federal environmental investigators and a sheriff's deputy. "Mrs. Whitman," the lead investigator announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you're under arrest for destruction of federally protected environmental habitat, filing fraudulent government documents, and conspiracy to violate environmental protection laws." The crowd fell silent except for the continued sizzle of barbecue grills and the sound of news cameras capturing everything in high definition. "This is persecution," Gloria shrieked as handcuffs clicked around her poison ivy-contaminated wrists. "I was protecting the neighborhood from his illegal plants." "Ma'am," the investigator replied calmly, "Mr. Martinez's restoration project is officially designated as a federal demonstration site. What you destroyed today was protected habitat under multiple environmental statutes." But the real moment of poetic justice was just beginning. Elena stepped forward with a thick folder of financial documents. "Sheriff's Department also has warrants for embezzlement and conspiracy charges," she announced. "Mrs. Whitman has stolen over $89,000 in community funds over the past 2 years." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs as neighbors realized their HOA president was not only an environmental criminal, but also a common thief. Brittany, despite her obvious poison ivy suffering, tried to support her partner in crime. "Derek's plants are dangerous," she shouted, gesturing wildly with hands that were already showing severe allergic reactions. "Look what they did to us!" That's when Sandra from the county environmental office delivered the mic drop moment. "Ma'am," Sandra said, stepping into the news camera's view, "poison ivy is a native Colorado species that belongs in this ecosystem. The only danger came from your illegal destruction of protected habitat while ignoring basic safety protocols." She gestured toward the poison ivy oil contamination covering Brittany's exposed skin. "What you're experiencing is the natural consequence of attacking native plants without proper knowledge or protection." The news reporter, realizing she'd stumbled into a much bigger story than environmental conservation, thrust her microphone toward me. "Mr. Martinez, how do you respond to accusations that your plants are dangerous?" I smiled calmly, standing beside what remained of my beautiful restoration project. Native plants have been protecting themselves from interference for millions of years. I just gave them the legal protection they deserved and let nature handle the rest. The crowd burst into applause while Gloria was led away in handcuffs, still ranting about environmental extremism and neighborhood safety. Brittany tried to flee the scene but was stopped by the second environmental investigator. "Ma'am, you're also facing federal charges for habitat destruction and child endangerment." As both women were loaded into separate police cars, covered in poison ivy contamination and facing federal environmental crimes, I stood surrounded by supportive neighbors and environmental advocates. The justice was perfect, permanent, and completely natural. The news cameras captured my final statement. Sometimes the best way to handle bullies is to let Mother Nature teach them why you should never underestimate someone who truly understands plants. The aftermath was more beautiful than I could have imagined. Within 48 hours, both Gloria and Brittany developed the most spectacular poison ivy reactions anyone in Pinewood Springs had ever witnessed. Emergency room visits, prescription medications, and weeks of misery that no amount of money could cure. Their insurance companies denied coverage for voluntary exposure to known environmental hazards during the commission of federal crimes. Gloria faced federal charges for environmental destruction, document fraud, and embezzlement. The financial investigation revealed she'd stolen $89,000 from community funds over 2 years, using the money to pay for fake legal advice and fraudulent harassment campaigns. She pled guilty to avoid trial and received 18 months in federal prison plus full restitution to the community. Brittany's federal environmental charges resulted in $75,000 in fines and a permanent restraining order prohibiting her from interfering with any environmental restoration projects. Her criminal record destroyed her real estate license, forcing her family to relocate within 90 days. They sold their house at a 25% loss and moved to Arizona, apparently believing desert climates would be safer than Colorado's native plant communities. The community transformation was immediate and remarkable. Elena was elected HOA president with 94% of the vote, while Frank became treasurer. Their first action was reversing all of Gloria's discriminatory decisions and refunding harassment fines to targeted residents. My restoration project became a genuine environmental success story. The county environmental office featured my demonstration site in their statewide newsletter, bringing environmental science students from 3 universities to study native habitat establishment techniques. Property values throughout Pinewood Springs increased an average of 12% due to our new reputation as an environmentally progressive community. But the sweetest victory was personal. My poison ivy barrier, now federally protected in perpetuity, had established permanent colonies throughout both properties. Next spring brought dozens of new plants emerging in locations where removal would violate federal environmental law. I'd created the most effective privacy barrier imaginable, one that was beautiful, legally untouchable, and naturally self-defending. My landscaping business benefited enormously from national media attention. The poison ivy guy became a regional celebrity, specializing in native habitat restoration and natural neighbor deterrent systems. Business increased 300% within 6 months. Elena and I discovered we shared more than just environmental values and community justice instincts. Our relationship grew from alliance to partnership to something deeper, rooted in mutual respect and shared appreciation for both legal victory and biological revenge. We married the following spring in my backyard, surrounded by thriving native plants and the most gorgeous poison ivy display anyone had ever seen. The wedding photos were featured in Colorado Environmental Magazine as an example of sustainable romance in natural settings. Using my tax credits and lawsuit settlements, I established the Environmental Justice Fund, providing free native landscaping services for elderly and disabled homeowners throughout the county. We've completed over 200 restoration projects, creating wildlife corridors that connect neighborhoods through sustainable plant communities. The annual Habitat Restoration Festival became a regional celebration of citizen environmental protection, drawing thousands of visitors to learn about native species cultivation and community organizing against bureaucratic overreach. Here's something that makes every morning coffee taste like victory. Native plant restoration provides 60% water usage reduction, eliminates chemical fertilizer runoff, and increases property values while creating permanent wildlife habitat. Environmental protection and economic benefits align perfectly when you understand which plants belong in Colorado soil. Gloria's former house was purchased by a young environmental science teacher who created a complementary native habitat that connects seamlessly with my demonstration site. The entire block is now a showcase of sustainable suburban development. 5 years later, I still start every day standing in my thriving ecosystem, listening to bird songs and watching butterflies dance among plants that taught two bullies the most expensive lesson of their lives. My poison ivy colonies have spread throughout the neighborhood through natural underground networks, creating privacy barriers and neighbor deterrent systems that will protect property owners for generations. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's creating something beautiful, permanent, and legally protected that improves your community while teaching bullies exactly why they should never underestimate someone who understands Mother Nature's justice system.
The red got his fans after all, just not the cedar one he's originally wanted. His poison ivy barriers is federally protected forever, while Gloria serving 18 months for stealing $89,000 from the communities, and Brittany lost $75,000 in fines plus her real estate license. The brilliance wasn't just a bland choice. The race understood that when you're fighting corruption, you don't need to break rules. You need to know them better than your opponents do. Environmental laws trump HOA bylaws. Federal protection beat God-body favorism. While they play petty politics, he plays the long game. Got your own HOA honor story brewing? Some board members drunk on power, denying reasonable requests while approving nonsense for their friends. Direct strategy work, research your rights, document their discrimination, find the legal loophole they miss. The best part? Direct landscaping business explodes after this. Sometimes standing up for bullies doesn't just feel good, it's paid dividends. Smash subscribe if you love watching corrupt officers get exactly what they deserve. Drop your widest HOA power trip story below. The crazier, the better. Remember, Mother Nature's been handling neighborhood dispute a lot longer than the homeowner association have existed.